The season 3 finale of My Adventures with Superman has officially dropped today, so I am going to rank all 3 seasons of the show from worst to best. Last place is season 1. Now, this is a show that I've always felt is good, but not great. I think each season has its own individual problems. So this ranking is really just which season I think has the least amount of problems with it. And I think this one has the most problems, which is probably because it was the first season, so they were kind of trying to find their footing and figure out exactly where they were going with the show, and, kind of still roughing out the edges of the show. It's definitely not bad, but I think the storyline for this season is definitely the weakest one. It has the weakest villain, I think. And it really was what started the biggest problem with the show as a whole, which is that the villain designs kind of suck. Like, all of the villain designs in the first season are extremely boring and bland, and if they didn't tell you who the villain was, you wouldn't know who the villain is supposed to be. And I think that's a big problem for season 1 and season 2, but primarily season 1. And I also don't really like that they take a bunch of villains from other heroes and use them in this show, which is a problem that primarily happens in this season and season 3, because they use Deathstroke, who is a Batman / Teen Titans villain, and then they used Heatwave, who is a Flash villain. And they didn't just use Heatwave, they used a gender-swapped version of Heatwave, which makes absolutely no sense. Superman has a female, fire-powered villain that was created for Superman the Animated Series. If they wanted to use a female, fire-powered supervillain, they didn't have to gender-swap a Flash villain and put it in a Superman show. They already have a Superman villain with fire powers who is female. Like, they just did a completely unnecessary thing by taking a Flash villain and gender swapping them just to have a villain with fire powers, because there's already a Superman villain that has fire powers and is female. So it was just a completely unnecessary choice, and I don't understand why they did it. And then with Deathstroke, I don't know why they used Deathstroke and not Bloodsport, because they're very similar characters. And especially Deathstroke's design is very similar to the design of Bloodsport in James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie. So I don't know why they didn't just call him Bloodsport, because there's not really much there to determine if it is Bloodsport or Deathstroke, because the design could be either one, and the only thing that really makes it Deathstroke is that he has an eye patch when his mask is off, and he uses swords a little bit more than he uses guns. But, I don't know why they didn't just use Bloodsport instead of Deathstroke, because that would have made far more sense. And I think a lot of the seasons kind of have a pacing problem, and I think this one had, a fairly big pacing problem where nothing really happens throughout the entire season. There's not a whole lot that really happens to progress the story forward. It's just kind of Superman going through and fighting a bunch of different villains of the week. Because nothing really happens to progress the storyline for this season until season 2, where the government actually comes after Superman. They're just kind of, Waller and General Lane are just kind of working in the background trying to take down Superman. But then they don't actually do anything in this season. It just felt like a season where nothing really happened. And, the season just kind of ended. And there was nothing that really happened. And the season was just kind of something that felt kind of pointless. I think that the Superman design is very good. I like his suit. I'm not super big on them redesigning the logo, but I think it does still work for the show. And because of the anime inspiration, I think changing his powers a little bit was pretty nice. It worked well. And, you know, with the anime inspiration and all, the powers worked well. With, like, the glowing blue energy and all that. I thought that worked pretty well. And the mystery behind exactly what Zero Day was and all, and who that masked figure was pretty good, but because they didn't actually really do anything with that build-up and that mystery, it just felt kind of pointless to even include it in there, because they didn't really actually do anything with it. It was just kind of a reason of why the government doesn't like Superman, that it just kind of felt unnecessary. So, you know, it's not a terrible season of television. Like, it was still decent, but it was very slow, and nothing really happened. And I think the villain designs really hold this season back a lot, because they're just really boring. And then some of the creative choices with choosing to use gender-swapped Heatwave and Deathstroke instead of Bloodsport, and whoever the villain from Superman animated series is, I don't really remember her name right now, but instead of using her and Bloodsport, they chose to use a gender-swapped Flash villain and then a Teen Titans villain. Didn't really make any sense to me. So this is easily the weakest season for me. Second place is Season 3. Now, I think this definitely improves upon the first two seasons in a lot of ways, but it also has some of the problems from those two seasons a bit more in the forefront than the other two seasons did. I think the villain designs in this season were improved upon a lot. You can tell who the villains are supposed to be by looking at them without them having to actually tell you who the villains are supposed to be. Like, the villain designs got far better in this season than they were in the first two seasons. But most of the villains that appear in this season aren't Superman villains. Like, they used 2 Wonder Woman villains and then still have the same Teen Titans villain that they had since season 1, right? They had Giganta and Dr. Poison were 2 of the only new villains introduced in this season. And then Deathstroke is still there, just like he is in every season. So the villain problem was far more noticeable in this season than it was in any of the other ones, because they didn't use any new Superman villains aside from the Eradicator, because Cyborg Superman doesn't really count because Hank was in the first 2 seasons as well, so he's not really necessarily a new villain. He's just in a new form now, being Cyborg Superman. So the Eradicator was really the only new villain that they actually used this season in terms of Superman villains, because the other 2 were Wonder Woman villains, which is just a massive problem with this show, is that they don't use enough Superman villains. Like, you don't have to just randomly pull a Wonder Woman villain into your show to use them. You can use Superman villains. He has enough villains to where you can use some of them. There's a lot of Superman villains that have never been used before, and a lot of them could easily fill the roles that the Wonder Woman villains filled in this season. Like, he has other female villains that they haven't used yet that could fill the roles of Giganta and Dr. Poison, or they could gender swap a Superman villain to have them still, you know, do the whole date with Jimmy thing while also being an actual Superman villain. Like, you know, instead of Dr. Poison, they could have used, like, the Prankster and done, like, a gender swapped Prankster or something. But instead they chose to just use a bunch of Wonder Woman villains, which just doesn't make any sense why they would choose that. And I also think this season has the biggest pacing problem out of any of the seasons, where the plot that they were going for, the story they were going for with the season, was very big and very ambitious, but they didn't execute it well because the story was both rushed and slow. Like, they somehow managed to make it seem both rushed and also really slow, because they had like about half the episodes in the season where nothing really happened that progressed the plot forward in any way, and like where they didn't really need to exist at all. And I also felt that Jimmy was kind of insufferable this season. Like, Kara very clearly likes him. Like, it was very obvious in season 2 and still very obvious in this season, and he just chose to essentially break up with her and not date her, just so that the writers could have some sort of forced drama and something to do with Jimmy this season. And I don't get it. Like, I don't know why they chose to do that, because it just kind of made Jimmy seem insufferable, to where by the end of the season, when they finally got together, I felt nothing, because I didn't care. And even though they technically didn't get together, because at the end Kara said that they would have just a friendship, because Jimmy said that he wanted to be a better friend earlier in the season. And I was just like, yeah, Jimmy kind of deserves that, because he's just been insufferable this entire season. I just don't care anymore. Like, I don't really care that they're maybe going to get back together. I don't care, because they made Jimmy so insufferable that if they do eventually get back together for good, I'm not going to care, because they just made him so extremely insufferable this season. Now, I think that this has the best individual episodes of the show. Right? Episode 5, 9, and 10 are the 3 best episodes of the entire show. But there's so many other episodes here that are just so weak and just where nothing of substance happens that it drags the season down. This is a season where the parts are greater than the whole. Like, if they cut out episode 6, 7, episode 6 and 7, and had something actually happen in those episodes that progressed the plotline forward, and it wasn't just random filler episodes where nothing important actually happened, the season might be a bit better. And that also kind of applies to earlier in the season, where like the first 3 episodes, nothing important really happened. Like, they had the Cyborg Superman subplot kind of happening in the background, and all the stuff with Hank in the first half of the season was really great. But all the stuff with the main gang in the first 3 episodes was not that interesting, and it wasn't really anything important going on there. So I feel like that's kind of the biggest problem with this season, is nothing happened in like the whole season. It just kind of went through, and they only had like about 5 episodes where something important actually happened. And given that it's a 10 episode season, that means half of the episodes were completely useless, meaningless filler that didn't really need to exist. So I think that the story they were going for is probably the best one of the show, and the finale did stick the landing and managed to be a great ending to a fairly mediocre season. But I think because it was so rushed and also so slow and full of filler, and also just the sheer lack of Superman villains in this season, hurts it to where it can't be in first place. In first place is Season 2. Now, I think this season also still has its problems, but I think it has the least amount of problems out of the other seasons. I think really the only major problem with this season is just the villain designs, which was also a problem in Season 1, because it still has pretty much all of the same villains from the first season, still with their crappy designs. And then they also have Brainiac, who I think this is the worst Brainiac design that we've ever gotten. Mainly because it just doesn't look like Brainiac. Like, it just looks like a random generic robot. Where if you showed someone a picture of Brainiac from this show, they would not be able to tell you that that was supposed to be Brainiac, because it doesn't look like Brainiac. It just looks like a robot, which is really the biggest problem with this season, is just Brainiac's design. I think everything else works really well. I think the storyline for this season is really good. It manages to actually progress the storyline from season 1 and have it kind of come to a head by like the midpoint of the season. And the storyline with Brainiac works really well. I think their take on Supergirl, while quite different from anything that we've seen before, did work for this show just because of the nature of this show and what this show is. I think their take on Supergirl did work for this show in particular. And it also didn't have the same problem as Season 1 and Season 3, where they didn't use Superman villains. Any new villain introduced in this season was a Superman villain. So that was really good. I am glad that they did that and that they actually decided to use Superman villains in a Superman show. Obviously, Lex still isn't bald in this season because he doesn't turn bald until Season 3, which is a problem. I don't like that modern takes on Superman think that Lex Luthor has to earn being bald. Like, he's supposed to just be bald. He shouldn't have to earn it. He should just be bald. That was a problem with the DCEU, and that's a problem with this show. Lex Luthor should be bald from the very first time he appears in the Superman project. He should not have to work for being bald. He should not have to work towards being bald. He should just be bald from the start, because that's what Lex Luthor is. He is a bald guy. Okay, you can't give Lex Luthor hair, because then it's not Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor doesn't have hair. He should not have to earn being bald. That's the biggest problem with this show's version of Lex Luthor. That and the fact that he never actually interacts with Superman at any point. Like, he never actually has any direct interactions with Superman. He interacts more with Jimmy Olsen than he does with Superman, which is a problem that occurs in both this season and especially in Season 3. And it doesn't have as much of a pacing problem as the other seasons did. It does have one episode that's kind of filler, when Clark's in space with Brainiac after being kidnapped by him and Kara, where it's just kind of Jimmy and Lois on Earth trying to get a spaceship to go and save Clark. That episode's kind of filler, and I think it's definitely the weakest episode of Season 2, but I don't think it's bad enough to pull it down below either of the other two seasons, because I think the rest of the season works, where the whole of the season is better than the sum of its, is better than each individual part, which is good, because while it doesn't have the best episodes of the show, it has the best overall story of the show, because it manages to pull it all together very nicely, and each episode moves the plot forward at a nice pace to where it's not rushed and it's not slow, so it doesn't have any of the pacing problems of Season 1 and Season 3. So I think because of that, this is easily the best season of the show for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like. It really helps me out. Also, subscribe to my channel. If you enjoyed the video, I'm sure I have other videos on the channel that you'll also enjoy, so go and check those out. And please feel free to share your ranking of the seasons down below in the comments. I would love to hear what your ranking of the different seasons of the show are. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.